My name is Karen Callahan. I'm 66 years old, a widow, and for more than 30 years, I helped build a vineyard that grew from 2 acres of wild soil into the pride of Sonoma Valley. Callahan Crest wasn't just land to me. It was memory, marriage, and meaning pressed into every vine. But one afternoon, as the sun sank behind the hills, my daughter stood across from me with papers in her hand and said the words I never thought I'd hear. "You're useless now." The air left my chest. She laid the contract on the table like a final judgment. $4 million, a signature line, and a future I had no part in. Elena smiled, proud of herself, and told me it was done. She had sold the vineyard. My vineyard. The one her father and I planted when she was still learning how to walk. She said the sale would cover her debts, open new opportunities, and finally give her control. I could only stare at the ink drying on the page, knowing something priceless had just been traded for something temporary. If you've ever watched the place that held your life slip through your fingers, you understand the silence that follows. Stay with me. I promise this story will show how quiet justice can be louder than anger, and how roots, once planted in truth, never truly die. I tried to speak, but my voice broke. Elena turned to the banker standing by the doorway. His name was David Ames, a man who'd known our family for years. He couldn't meet my eyes. I saw guilt flicker behind his polite nod, as if he knew this deal wasn't just numbers. It was betrayal written in black and white. "Elena," I whispered, "you sold our home." She crossed her arms, adjusting her silk jacket. "It's business, Mother. You wouldn't understand. The vineyard is worth more as an asset than a memory. And frankly, I can't keep supporting you. You've had your time. It's mine now." Supporting me. As if the woman who raised her, taught her how to prune vines, and stayed awake through harvest storms was now a burden too heavy to carry. The room smelled of oak barrels and dust. The light slanted across the wooden floor, catching the gold band of my wedding ring. I touched it, remembering Peter's hands guiding mine through our first planting season. He used to say, "We don't own this land, Karen. We borrow it from tomorrow." Elena gathered the papers, tucking them into a leather folder. "The buyers will take possession at the end of the week. You'll need to vacate before then." "Vacate," I repeated softly, as though saying it could make sense of it. She handed me a folded sheet, an itinerary of my departure. "I've arranged a cottage on North Hill. Consider it a gift. There's no reason for you to stay here and make things awkward." David shifted his weight, glancing toward the door. "Mrs. Callahan, I'm sure this is difficult. The transaction is finalized, but if you need assistance with—" "I'll manage," I said, standing straight. Elena exhaled, relieved. "Good. I'll have Mason pack the essentials. Try to keep it simple. The movers arrive at dusk." My eyes drifted toward the cabinet beside the fireplace. Inside, a small steel safe sat hidden behind a framed photo of Peter and me. Its key rested in my pocket, warm against my palm. Elena hadn't asked about it. Maybe she didn't remember. Maybe she thought everything worth owning was already on paper. I took one last look around the room. Every surface held a memory. Wine stains from late-night tastings, scratches from Peter's old chair, the faint scent of lavender polish he used every Sunday. She thought she'd sold a vineyard, but what she really sold was the story of our lives. I reached for my suitcase. It was light, almost insultingly so, filled with a few clothes, a photo, and the ring box Peter had given me on our 10th anniversary. As I walked toward the door, the floorboards creaked, echoing the sound of footsteps that would never return. Elena's voice followed me. "Try to be out before sunset. The buyers want to see the property tonight." I paused at the threshold, the last sliver of afternoon sun cutting across my face. "You've taken the land, Elena. I said quietly, but not my dignity. Outside, the wind carried the scent of ripened grapes and the promise of rain. I turned the key in my hand, feeling its weight. Somewhere, beyond all this noise, Peter's wisdom waited, buried not in soil, but in something deeper. I stepped into the fading light, the vineyard glowing behind me like a memory refusing to fade, and began walking toward whatever truth still waited to be unearthed. The road curved through silent hills, the air heavy with the scent of rain. By the time I reached the cottage, twilight had fallen, painting the sky in bruised colors. North Hill stood quiet, tucked between rows of forgotten vines. The porch boards sighed beneath my steps, as if they remembered the days when laughter still drifted from this place. I turned the rusted key in the lock and pushed the door open. Dust floated through a beam of lamplight, swirling like small ghosts. The air smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. This was no grand estate, only a caretaker's cabin Peter once used during harvest seasons. Still, it was shelter. Inside, the room was bare but familiar. A narrow bed, a small table, a fireplace waiting for a match. I set my suitcase down and ran my hand across the old wooden counter. My reflection blinked back at me from the window pane. Older, lonelier, but not broken. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then steady. I lit a candle, its flame trembling in the draft, and the room softened with light. I moved slowly, sweeping dust from the shelves, opening windows that hadn't breathed in years. Every small task steadied me, reminded me that life, like the soil, can be tilled again even after being abandoned. In a wooden box by the fireplace, I found a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside lay a gold wedding band and a folded piece of paper yellowed by time. Peter's handwriting curved across the page, strong yet gentle. Forgive her gently. The ink had faded, but the message burned bright. My throat tightened. He must have left it here years ago, perhaps knowing one day I would need it. I pressed the note to my heart, hearing his voice as if he stood behind me. Karen, he'd say, don't let bitterness grow where love once lived. I sat by the window, the candle's glow reflecting off the ring in my hand. Outside, the vineyard stretched into darkness, vines sleeping under the storm. I wondered if Elena even looked back when she left, or if her eyes were fixed only on numbers and ledgers. Somewhere, behind her pride, the little girl who once chased fireflies through these fields was still hiding. I placed the ring on the table, beside the letter. Together, they formed a quiet reminder. I was not defined by what I'd lost, but by what I chose to carry forward. The rain deepened, drumming softly on the roof. I pulled a shawl around my shoulders and poured a small glass of water, raising it like a toast. To beginnings that don't ask for permission, I whispered. A gust of wind rattled the shutters, but the candle held its flame. I breathed deeply, letting the silence fill me, feeling strength rise beneath the sorrow. Forgiveness didn't mean surrender. It meant remembering who I was before the wound. I opened the small window above the sink. Cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and crushed grapes. The vineyard might no longer bear my name on paper, but its roots still knew my footsteps. Somewhere in those rows, the truth waited, patient and unyielding, like the land itself. I folded Peter's note carefully and slid it into my journal. Tomorrow, I would walk the boundary lines, trace the shape of what remained, and listen for whatever secrets the soil still kept. As the last light faded, I sat beside the window, candle flickering low, and whispered to the empty room. She took the house, but not the home inside me. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, echoing like a promise. I let the sound cradle me, steady and sure, and closed my eyes with a quiet vow. I would forgive, but I would not forget. The land remembered, and so would I. Morning broke through a veil of fog, pale light spilling across the wooden floor of the cottage. I wrapped my shawl tighter and stepped outside. The earth was still damp from last night's rain, and the air smelled of rosemary and ash. For a moment, I let myself believe peace had returned, until my phone rang. It was Martha Green, an old neighbor from the valley, her voice hurried and uneasy. "Karen, I just came from town. People are talking, at the cafe, at church. They say you forged papers, that you tried to stop Elena's sale. Is any of this true?" The wind caught the edge of my sleeve, pulling it like a question I didn't want to answer. "No, Martha, it isn't true." "Oh dear," she sighed. "I knew it couldn't be, but the story's spreading fast. Elena's been meeting with the garden circle, telling everyone you refuse to accept change, that you're—" Her voice faltered. "Unstable." The words settled in my chest like a stone. I thanked her, though the air between us had grown heavy. After she hung up, I stood still, listening to the rustle of vines waking in the distance. Gossip travels faster than truth, especially when pride fuels it. I walked down the narrow path toward the old fence line. Beyond it lay fields that once carried my name. Now they were just rows of green and gold, indifferent to the noise of human tongues. My boots sank into the soft soil, grounding me. At the general store, whispers followed me like shadows. Two women paused by the produce stand, lowering their voices as I passed. One smiled politely, the other turned away. The cashier hesitated before greeting me, her cheer forced and thin. I paid for bread and tea without a word. Defending myself to those who had already chosen their version of the story would be like shouting into the wind. Peter used to say, "The truth doesn't need a crowd, it just needs time." On the way back, I stopped by the small chapel near the ridge. Inside, sunlight filtered through stained glass, scattering colors across the pews. I sat near the back, letting the quiet press against me. My hands rested on my knees, still steady despite the tremor in my heart. I whispered, "Forgive her gently." The phrase felt heavier now. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was a choice to rise above the mire of lies. Still, each word of slander cut like a vine knife, clean, quick, leaving its sting behind. When I stepped outside, Martha was waiting by her car. She looked ashamed. "I shouldn't have believed any of it, Karen. I'm sorry. I just didn't know what to think." "You thought what you were told," I said softly. "It happens. Stories grow like weeds. The roots are always shallow." Her eyes glistened. "Can I do anything?" "Just don't water them." She nodded, squeezing my hand before driving away. Back at the cottage, I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching clouds drift over the valley. Every rumor was another attempt to erase me, to make my silence look like guilt. But I'd learned long ago that truth, like wine, deepens in stillness. It doesn't shout. It waits. I opened my journal and wrote 3 lines. "They call me false. The vines still grow. Time will speak." As I closed the book, I noticed the safe key on the table glinting in the late afternoon light. I traced its outline with my finger. Somewhere, hidden behind walls of pride and paper, was the proof of everything Peter and I built. The phone buzzed again. Another call I didn't answer. Some voices aren't meant to be entertained. I poured the tea into a small cup, breathing in its steam, steadying my heartbeat. Outside, children's laughter echoed faintly from the distant road. Life went on, indifferent to rumor, unbothered by slander. I sipped slowly, letting calm return like sunlight breaking through cloud. "They can twist my story," I murmured, but not my truth. As evening settled, I blew out the candle, the room folding back into quiet. The world beyond could chatter all it wished. I would meet it not with noise, but with patience. By the time the fog lifted the next morning, the hills shimmered under a pale sun. I stepped outside, brushing dust from my coat, and saw a familiar truck rolling up the dirt road. Its tires crunched over the gravel in a rhythm I'd known for decades. When the engine cut off, the quiet settled back like a blanket. Hank Dawson climbed down, his cap pulled low, boots muddied from the fields. Age had etched deeper lines across his face, but his eyes carried the same steady kindness I remembered. He held a basket in one hand, fresh eggs, a loaf of bread, and a small jar of honey. "Didn't reckon I'd see you back on this hill," he said, setting the basket on the porch. I smiled faintly. "Didn't reckon I'd have a reason to be." He nodded, scratching his chin. "Heard about what happened. Folks can't stop talking, though none of it's worth repeating. Elena's got her hands full with that sale." "She has more than her hands full," I said quietly. Hank leaned against the railing, looking out over the valley. "Hard to believe she'd let go of land like this. Your Peter once told me, the soil remembers who tends it with love. He meant you, you know." I followed his gaze. The vines stretched far below, a living tapestry of green, untouched by the noise of the world. "She thinks it's just real estate now," I murmured. He tilted his head, studying me. "You ever check that old cellar safe after Peter passed? He mentioned something. Said the land would keep the truth if ever words got twisted." My breath caught. "He said that?" "Clear as the sunrise." Hank's voice softened. "Said he tucked away what mattered most, somewhere no fool could turn it into gold." I looked down at the key resting against my palm. I'd carried it for years, never knowing what more it guarded than memories. "I always thought he meant the vines," I said. "Could be," Hank answered. "But Peter was a planner. Man didn't plant a seed without a reason. If he left you a key, there's a door somewhere waiting for it." The thought settled deep inside me, like a seed finding soil. I turned the key over, watching light catch its worn edges. Hank reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, edges yellowed. "Found this cleaning out the old tool shed. Figured it was yours." Inside lay a faded photograph, Peter standing beside Hank, both younger, covered in dust and pride. On the back, in Peter's handwriting, were 5 words. "The vault holds more than wine." A chill moved through me, part wonder, part recognition. "Thank you, Hank." He shrugged. "Didn't do nothin', just thought you might need reminding. Truth don't vanish, even if folks pretend it does. Sometimes it just waits in the dark." We stood in silence, the wind stirring the scent of rosemary from the garden. He adjusted his cap. "If you ever need help, you know where to find me. Still keep my tools sharp." "I know," I said, and I meant it. He gave a small nod and turned toward his truck. As he drove away, the tires traced a path through dust that glimmered in the sun, then disappeared into the bend. I held the photograph close, tracing Peter's smile with my thumb. "The vault holds more than wine." The words echoed through me like a quiet bell. I looked toward the old cottage cellar, half hidden behind overgrown ivy. For years, I'd walked past it, thinking it only stored empty barrels and dust. Now, it seemed to breathe again. Inside, I gathered a lantern and brushed cobwebs from my sleeves. The cellar door creaked open, releasing a gust of cool, damp air. Steps descended into shadow, stone walls whispering stories I had forgotten. I stopped halfway down, heart steady, hand gripping the railing. Whatever Peter had left, he'd done so with purpose. Truth buried beneath pride, waiting for the one who still believed in it. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain across the valley. I turned back toward the light, the photograph pressed against my chest, and whispered, "If the land keeps secrets, I'll learn to listen." The key weighed heavier in my hand now, not as a relic, but as a promise. Evening slipped quietly across the valley as clouds gathered over the hills. The air held the chill of coming rain when I lit the lantern and descended into the cellar. Dust motes danced in the glow, rising from the steps beneath my boots. Each creak echoed softly against stone walls lined with old barrels, their labels faded, their contents long since turned to silence. I hadn't set foot down here since Peter passed. The air still carried his presence: oak, tobacco, a trace of sandalwood. He always said this place was the heart of the vineyard, where time slowed down to teach patience. Now it waited like an unopened letter, holding truths sealed away by love. I reached the far corner, where ivy roots had pushed through the cracks in the foundation. Behind an aging shelf of wine bottles stood a narrow steel door no wider than my shoulder. Its handle was cold beneath my fingertips. The safe had been installed decades ago, tucked away so deep that even Elena might have forgotten it existed. I took the key from around my neck and turned it in the lock. For a breath, nothing moved. Then the mechanism gave with a soft click, and the door opened, sighing out a puff of cool air scented with earth and iron. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a small chest the color of dusk. Kneeling, I placed the lantern beside it and lifted the lid. Inside rested a thin folder bound with a faded ribbon. Beneath it, an envelope marked in Peter's steady handwriting. "For Karen, when roots are tested." My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. The first document was the vineyard's original deed, edges browned with age, the signatures still clear, mine and Peter's. Behind it, another sheet, stamped and notarized, bearing the words, "Reserve deed," and in smaller print, "Void clause." I read slowly, my heart tightening. Any sale or transfer executed without the co-signature of Karen Callahan shall be rendered null and subject to recall by the financial institution of record. The words glowed beneath the lantern light, steady and absolute. Peter had written protection into the very soil of our legacy. Elena's sale, no matter how loudly announced, could never stand without me. I pressed my palm against the paper, feeling the calm strength of his foresight. He had known one day ambition might outrun gratitude, that love might be tested not by strangers, but by blood. The envelope beneath it was heavier. I opened it carefully, revealing a letter penned in Peter's familiar hand. "My dearest Karen, if you are reading this, the vineyard is no longer in the hands we intended. You were always its heart. I was only its caretaker. Should Elena forget the roots that raised her, the law will remember. Present these documents to the bank. Let justice be quiet, as you always taught. And when the hurt feels too sharp, remember mercy. It matures like good wine. Forgive her gently, and when the season is right, let her work for what she once took for granted. All my love, always." Peter's tears blurred the ink, and I closed my eyes, letting his words rest against my chest. For the first time since that day in the main house, the heaviness inside me began to shift. This was more than evidence. It was trust, passed from his hands to mine. I gathered the papers carefully, wrapping them once more and slipping them into my leather satchel. The lantern's glow brushed across the stone floor, catching the glint of a single bottle half buried beneath a fallen board. I pulled it free and wiped away the dust. The label read, "Vintage 1989, the year Elena was born, the first harvest Peter and I bottled together." I cradled it in my arms, a reminder that beginnings and betrayals can share the same year, and both can be reclaimed in time. Standing, I looked once more around the cellar. Shadows leaned gently against the walls, no longer foreboding but watchful, as if guarding what had always been ours. When I stepped outside, the rain had started again, fine and silver. I locked the cellar door, slipped the key into my coat pocket, and whispered into the night. You planted the truth well, Peter. It took its time, but it grew. The lantern flickered, reflecting in a puddle at my feet. Somewhere, beyond the dark clouds, the stars waited to be seen again. I turned toward the path leading down to town, paper secure, heart steady, and whispered, "The ground may shake, but the roots still hold." Morning arrived with a hush after the storm. Mist curled over the valley, softening the edges of the hills. I drove into town with the folder pressed against my chest, its contents more precious than any inheritance. The bank's clock tower chimed 9 as I parked in front of a small brick office with gold lettering across the glass. Patel and Myers, attorneys at law. Grace Patel had been Peter's friend long before she became our lawyer. She met me at the door, still in her gray wool coat, glasses perched low on her nose. "Karen," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of understanding. "I heard about Elena. Come in." The warmth inside was immediate. The smell of coffee, the low hum of morning traffic beyond the window. Grace led me to her desk, motioning for me to sit. "You've brought something." I set the satchel down and slid the folder toward her. "Peter left these in the vault. He knew this day might come." She opened it slowly, eyes moving over each page with practiced precision. "Original deed, reserve deed, and—" She paused, adjusting her glasses. "Here, the void clause." Her voice steadied. "Executed and notarized. That means any transaction without your co-signature is legally defective." Relief swelled quietly in my chest, tempered by the ache of how we'd arrived here. "She thought selling it would save her," I said, "but it was never hers alone to sell." Grace nodded, taking a pen from the holder on her desk. "We'll handle this properly. I'll file a notice of non-consent with Redwood Agricultural Bank. That triggers a review and freezes all proceeds tied to the sale. The court will determine ownership once the bank completes recall procedures." She typed quickly, drafting a formal letter. The rhythmic tapping filled the room, a sound of order returning to chaos. "Karen," she said, not looking up, "Peter protected you well. He must have trusted your patience more than your anger." I smiled faintly. He always said justice grows best in silence. When the letter was printed, she slid it across the desk. "This notice confirms that you, as co-founder and co-owner, did not authorize or sign any transfer. Redwood is bound by law to suspend the transaction. Within a week, they'll file a motion in county court." Her eyes softened. "I'll send this certified today, but I need you to stay quiet. No press, no gossip, no confrontation. Let the paper speak." Silence. The very weapon Elena believed would bury me would now become my shield. "I understand." Grace leaned back, studying me. "You're not just fighting for land, Karen. You're preserving intent. This vineyard isn't about profit. It's about legacy." "Legacy," I repeated, the word settling like a seed in my chest. She placed a copy of the notice in an envelope, stamped and sealed. "I'll handle delivery myself. When Redwood receives it, they'll initiate the recall. That will force a preliminary hearing." Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, catching the reflection of the gold lettering on her window. Patel and Myers glowed like a promise. Grace stood, her voice gentle but firm. "You'll hear noise, accusations. Let them pass. The law is patient, and truth has your name on it." I rose, clutching the folder to my chest. "Thank you, Grace, for seeing through the storm." "Peter saw it first," she said. "I'm just following the map he left behind." As I stepped outside, the morning had warmed. mist lifting off the vines along the roadside. Cars passed, carrying strangers unaware of the quiet war being waged in paper and ink. I looked toward the distant ridge, where Callahan Crest lay hidden in light and shadow. Elena would learn soon enough that signatures forged in pride fade faster than ink written in love. I opened my journal on the hood of the car and wrote a single line: "Let silence speak louder than sorrow." Then I closed it, slid the key into my pocket, and started the engine. Driving back toward North Hill, I felt a calm resolve settle deep within me. Justice didn't always need a gavel or applause. Sometimes it only needed a well-kept record and the courage to wait. At the turn leading to the cottage, the wind carried the faint scent of rain and oak. I whispered to the empty road ahead, "The law will find its way home." By the end of the week, the valley bloomed again, dressed in spring light. News of the sale rippled quietly through Sonoma, carried by whispers in boutiques and cafes. I drove into town for groceries, watching through the window as a familiar figure stepped out of a silver convertible parked across the street. Elena's laughter cut through the hum of the morning. She wore a bright silk dress and carried a shopping bag stamped with gold lettering. A salesman trailed behind her, balancing boxes. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The same child who once knelt in the dirt beside me, her hands sticky with grape juice, asking how long vines took to grow. "Elena," I called softly. She turned, surprise flashing in her eyes before pride rose like a curtain. "Mother," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be busy at the cottage." "I was," I answered, calm as still water. "Just picking up a few things." Her smile held edges. "Well, things are looking up. The buyers are thrilled. I've already spoken with their design team. New branding, new label, modern, fresh. You know how I've always wanted to move us forward." "Forward," I echoed. "Does forward always mean away?" She blinked, then shrugged. "You wouldn't understand. The industry's changing. Tradition is lovely, but it doesn't pay the bills." Behind her, a boutique clerk opened the door, greeting her by name. She waved lightly, the movement dismissive. "Anyway, I can't talk long. I have a meeting with the bank this afternoon. They've extended my credit line. Finally, someone recognizes potential." A flicker of concern passed through me. "Elena, debt is not recognition. It's a leash that tightens." She laughed, the sound brittle. "You always see clouds where there's sunlight. Don't worry, I'm handling it." Before I could answer, a voice spoke from behind me. "Mrs. Callahan." It was David Ames, the banker who had witnessed the sale. He held a leather folder under one arm, his tie loosened from the midday heat. "David," I greeted. "Busy week?" His glance shifted between us, measured and cautious. "You could say that." His tone carried something unsaid. He turned to Elena. "Ms. Callahan, I've left several messages regarding your account. It's important we review your standing after recent activity." Her expression stiffened. "There's nothing to review. The funds will clear any day now." David's eyes flickered toward me, then back to her. "Until everything is confirmed, I'd advise restraint. New purchases before settlement can complicate." Elena cut him off. "Thank you, Mr. Ames, but I don't need financial lectures. I've got it under control." He inclined his head politely, though the crease in his brow deepened. "Of course, we'll be in touch." When he walked away, she exhaled sharply. "He worries too much. Honestly, everyone does. You'd think success was a sin." I studied her face, searching for the daughter beneath the veneer of certainty. "Success without roots can't stand, Elena. A ribbon tied to air unravels in the first storm." She rolled her eyes. "You and your vineyard proverbs. Not everything has to grow from the ground, Mother. Some things can just Shine. Shine fades, I said gently. Roots endure. She checked her watch, already restless. I have to go. Try not to worry, all right? I'm not a child anymore. No, I murmured. But some lessons wait until we are. She hesitated, as if the words touched something she didn't want to feel. Then she turned, sliding into the driver's seat. The car purred to life, the sound sleek and hollow. As she drove away, sunlight flashed off the windshield, momentarily blinding, then gone. I stood on the sidewalk, the hum of the town resuming around me. Through the window of the boutique, a row of silk ribbons hung from a display. Bright, delicate, untethered. I thought of calloused hands, of soil beneath fingernails, of the way Peter's laughter used to rise with the morning fog. In the reflection, my face looked older but steady, framed by the same valley that had shaped every line. Elena's path glittered for now, but even gold paint cracks when it dries too fast. I turned toward the grocery store, the list folded in my pocket, and whispered to myself, let her chase ribbons. I'll trust the roots. 2 mornings later, sunlight streamed through the cottage windows, striking the table where Peter's papers lay neatly stacked. I gathered them into a folder and drove into town again. The road lined with budding vines and the low hum of tractors in distant fields. The scent of rosemary drifted through the air, a reminder that the valley never hurried, no matter how loud its people became. At Patel and Myers, Grace greeted me with a nod, motioning toward the adjoining conference room. A man waited inside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, spectacles perched low. Karen, this is Malcolm Chen, she said. Independent auditor, specializes in agricultural transfers. Malcolm extended his hand, firm but respectful. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. I've reviewed preliminary filings for Callahan Crest. Thought we should speak before I finalize the report. I took a seat beside Grace. You've seen the documents? Yes, he replied, opening a thin binder. Something caught my attention. The closing packet for the sale includes 2 signatures, your daughter's and one labeled as yours. Only, it isn't. Grace leaned forward. Forgery? Malcolm nodded slowly. The handwriting differs from every prior deed I compared. The signature curve doesn't match, and the ink composition suggests it was added later. It's textbook alteration. A quiet ache rose in my chest. So she went that far. She may not have understood the clause, he said carefully, but the bank will. Once my report is certified, Redwood Agricultural Bank must honor the void. The sale becomes null by law. Grace tapped her pen, calm and deliberate. We'll include this in the recall submission. It will strengthen the injunction. Malcolm slid a summary sheet toward me. I'll file the full audit this afternoon. If anyone questions authenticity, my findings will stand. The land can't be transferred without both signatures. Period. I traced the edge of the page, steadying my breath. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Truth deserves witnesses. He offered a small nod. It does, Mrs. Callahan. Paper can lie, but ink can't hide forever. As he packed his folder, a knock sounded on the door. A tall man in a tailored suit stepped inside, confidence gleaming in his cufflinks. Grace stiffened. Mr. Fairmont. Agent Fairmont, he corrected with a polished smile. Representative of the purchasing group. Thought I'd drop by. Seems there's a bit of confusion. Grace's tone cooled. The matter is under legal review. Any contact regarding the sale should go through our office. He turned his attention to me. Mrs. Callahan, I admire your dedication to legacy, truly, but these disputes can get messy. The buyers would prefer a quiet resolution. If you were to withdraw your objection, they'd be willing to make it worth your while. I met his gaze, calm as stone. You mean a payment? A gesture of goodwill, he corrected smoothly. A generous one. Grace rose. That's enough, Mr. Fairmont. You're proposing hush money. The answer is no. He smirked, unfazed. Think it over. Sometimes it's easier to let go than to dig in. I stood, my voice steady. I've spent a lifetime tending soil. Digging in is what I do best. His smile faltered. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room, heavy as thunderclouds. Then he adjusted his tie, murmured something about regret, and left. Grace exhaled, shaking her head. They're nervous. Good. The more they push, the stronger our case becomes. She opened a drawer, retrieving a single sheet. Before we finalize the recall, we'll request an environmental compliance letter from the county. It's routine, but it will buy us time. Keeps the sale frozen until every box is checked. Another safeguard, I said. Exactly. She looked up. By the time they realize what Peter built into that deed, the court will already be holding the reins. Outside, clouds gathered again, shadows sweeping across the vineyard slopes. I thanked Malcolm and Grace, stepping into the breeze with my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. As I walked to the car, Fairmont stood by the curb, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and offered a thin smile. You're a formidable woman, Mrs. Callahan. Let's hope you enjoy paperwork as much as wine. I do, I said softly, opening the car door. Paperwork lasts longer. Driving back toward North Hill, I felt the hum of quiet certainty settle through me. The truth was moving now. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable, like roots finding water beneath stone. By dusk, the first stars appeared above the valley, faint but steady. I placed Peter's letter on the table beside the lantern and whispered, "We're almost there." A full week passed since I'd left the main house. The valley carried on with its patient rhythm, vines climbing trellises, clouds drifting above like quiet witnesses. I kept to the cottage, pruning the overgrown garden, trusting the process Grace had set in motion. Justice, I reminded myself, does not arrive with noise, it arrives with notice. On Friday morning, I received a call from Grace. "It's time," she said. "Redwood Agricultural Bank has filed their motion. The court's convening this afternoon. You should be there." The ride into town felt both swift and endless. The courthouse stood on the corner of Main and 3rd, its white columns washed in sunlight, the flag above it rippling in the wind. I paused at the steps, breathing in the scent of paper, oak, and memory. Peter's words echoed softly inside me. Let the law remember. Inside, the hallway buzzed with low conversation. Clerks moved between offices, carrying files, their footsteps brisk against the marble floor. Grace met me near the bench outside courtroom B, her expression steady. "Just stay quiet," she murmured. "Everything's in motion." Moments later, the doors opened. We stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of pine polish and old books. Wooden pews lined the back, while the judge's bench rose like a small mountain at the front. Judge Harris adjusted his glasses, his gaze sharp yet calm. On the opposite side, Elena sat flanked by 2 attorneys. Her silk blouse was crisp, but her hands betrayed her, the way they clenched and unclenched around her handbag. She looked over, eyes meeting mine for a fleeting second before darting away. David Ames from Redwood Bank stood near the front, holding a thin stack of documents. His expression carried the solemn duty of a man who knew the truth, but wished he didn't have to say it aloud. When the clerk called the session to order, every sound seemed to fade except the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. "Case number 17-423, the clerk announced. Redwood Agricultural Bank versus Callahan Crest Holdings. Judge Harris nodded. "Proceed." David stepped forward. "Your Honor, we've received verified documentation indicating a breach in contractual authority concerning the recent sale of Callahan Crest Vineyard. The transfer was executed without co-signature from the second title holder, Mrs. Karen Callahan. Under the void clause, this sale is subject to immediate recall. A murmur rippled through the room. Elena's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith. The judge raised a hand. Intent does not supersede law. If the clause exists, the sale cannot stand. Grace approached the bench, placing the notarized deeds and Malcolm Chen's audit report before him. Your Honor, Exhibit A confirms dual ownership. Exhibit B verifies forgery of Mrs. Callahan's signature. Judge Harris examined the pages, his brow furrowing. These are clear. Redwood Agricultural Bank retains authority to freeze all funds related to this sale pending resolution. He turned to Elena. Ms. Callahan, by statute, you are required to appear in court for all further proceedings. Any attempt to access or transfer the disputed funds is prohibited. The clerk called her name, voice echoing against the wood-paneled walls. Elena Callahan. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. I saw the truth dawn on her like a slow sunrise. Her empire built on borrowed sunlight had met the first shadow. The judge signed the order with a deliberate stroke. This court hereby authorizes recall and places a temporary injunction on Callahan Crest Vineyard until proper ownership is confirmed. Grace inclined her head. Thank you, Your Honor. The gavel struck once, a sound both final and freeing. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed in afternoon light. Elena exited ahead of me, her heels tapping, sharply, her composure cracking with each step. David approached, offering a small nod of respect. Mrs. Callahan, he said quietly, the bank appreciates your cooperation. The recall is active as of this hour. I met his gaze. Thank you for honoring the truth. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. So am I said, looking toward my daughter. But sometimes the soil has to be turned before anything new can grow. Elena paused at the bottom of the stairs, the wind catching her hair. For a moment, she looked like the child who once begged to stay up late during harvest nights, watching barrels fill beneath the stars. But that memory flickered and faded as she turned away, swallowed by the noise of the street. I stood on the steps, folder pressed against my chest, heart steady. 1 week ago, she'd ordered me out. Now, the law had called her back. Justice didn't raise its voice. It simply arrived, on schedule, carrying my name on its page. The morning of the hearing arrived clear and still, sunlight spilling across the hills like a promise kept. I stood in the doorway of the cottage, the cool air brushing my face, Peter's letter clutched in my hand. Its edges had softened from being read and reread, but the words remained firm, his voice written in ink that time couldn't fade. Let justice be quiet, as you always taught. I folded it carefully and slipped it inside my coat pocket before starting the drive into town. The road wound through familiar rows of vines, leaves shimmering in the light. For a moment, I remembered walking these paths beside Peter, our hands stained with harvest, our laughter mixing with the hum of crickets. Today, those same vines bore witness to a different season, one of reckoning and return. When I reached the courthouse, Grace was waiting at the steps, her briefcase clasped tightly. You ready? She asked. As ready as the truth, I said. Inside, the corridors were hushed, filled only with the low shuffle of papers and distant echoes of other proceedings. We entered the courtroom, and I took my seat beside Grace. Across the aisle, Elena sat rigid, her shoulders drawn, her face pale against the dark fabric of her suit. She glanced my way briefly, but the pride that once guarded her eyes was cracking under the weight of consequence. Judge Harris entered, robes trailing like a tide of gravity. The clerk called the session to order, and the murmur of the room faded into silence. Today we review the petition of Redwood Agricultural Bank concerning the Callahan Crest property. The judge began, his voice calm, deliberate. This court has received all relevant documentation and witness statements. Grace rose, placing the deed and audit before him. Your Honor, these documents confirm dual ownership and verify that the transaction executed by Ms. Callahan was done without her co-owner's consent. The judge scanned the pages, nodding. The evidence is sufficient. The void clause is valid and enforceable. The sale, therefore, is rendered null until corrected by lawful procedure. Elena's attorney began to object, but the judge lifted a hand. The record is clear. A contract without full authorization holds no standing. The weight in the room shifted. Elena's breath caught audibly, her composure unraveling. She leaned toward her counsel, whispering something urgent, but his reply was a small shake of the head. The truth no longer needed a voice. It had found its form in ink and seal. Grace sat back, eyes steady, while I clasped my hands in my lap, the letter pressing softly against my heart. Peter's foresight had become my armor. He hadn't armed me with anger, but with preparation, and the law now echoed his love in every line of the ruling. Judge Harris signed the injunction, his pen gliding across the page. The property remains in joint ownership until further resolution. The funds shall remain frozen. Redwood Agricultural Bank retains oversight of the estate's operations until compliance is achieved. He looked toward me then, his expression softened by respect. Mrs. Callahan, your husband's documentation reflects great care. This is the kind of diligence we hope families remember. I inclined my head. He believed the truth should never need to shout, Your Honor. A faint smile tugged at his lips before he rapped the gavel once. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed like a final door closing. Elena stood slowly, eyes lowered, her strength slipping through her fingers. For the first time in years, she seemed small, not from weakness, but from the hollow space pride leaves behind. Outside, sunlight spilled over the courthouse steps, warm and forgiving. Grace touched my arm. It's done. The vineyard is safe. Safe. The word rang through me like a bell. Thank you, Grace, for walking beside me. Peter drew the map, she said. You just had to follow it. I reached into my coat, unfolding the letter one last time. The ink shimmered faintly in the light. When the hurt feels too sharp, remember mercy. It matures like good wine. The breeze carried the scent of soil and oak as I whispered, Justice is quiet, but it always arrives. I looked toward the distant hills where the vines swayed gently in the wind, their roots deep and unwavering. The land, once sold in haste, now stood free again, proof that truth, though buried, can rise when tended with patience. Rain returned to the valley 2 days after the ruling, a soft drizzle that blurred the outlines of the hills. I stayed inside the cottage, tending to quiet tasks, mending curtains, polishing the old lantern, making tea strong enough to chase away the damp. The papers lay safely in a drawer, sealed and signed, and for the first time in months, the air in my lungs felt light again. Yet peace rarely comes without echo. By late afternoon, the phone began to buzz. The first call came from Martha. Karen, I thought you should know, she said gently. The papers printed a story this morning. Front page, vineyard sale voided, forgery alleged. I closed my eyes. Did they name her? They did, Martha whispered. Elena Callahan. They quoted the court order. People are talking, some with pity, some with judgment. I told them the truth would come out, but, oh dear, she must be hurting. She made her choices, I said softly. Now the truth is only showing her what it costs. After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. Somewhere in town, my daughter was facing the weight of headlines she'd written herself, letter by letter, signature by signature. By evening, another call came. Grace's voice was calm, but measured. The bank confirmed the injunction. Elena's accounts are frozen. The buyers have withdrawn their interest. Investors are pulling back. She'll need to account for every dollar. I thanked her, though sorrow pressed behind my ribs. Pride is a poor companion when the world stops clapping. Night settled in, and I lit a single candle. Its reflection shimmered in the window pane, flickering beside my shadow. The cottage was quiet, except for the rain against the roof, steady as a heartbeat. I thought of Peter, how he'd guided me not toward triumph, but toward understanding. Justice may right the scales, but mercy keeps them from breaking. Hours later, as I set the kettle to boil, the phone rang again. Sharper this time, the sound cutting through the stillness. I hesitated before answering. A voice trembled on the other end. "Mother." My hand tightened around the receiver. "Elena." "I don't know where to start," she said, words spilling like water through cracked glass. "The papers, the calls, everyone's vanished. The partners, the buyers, no one's returning messages. The bank won't release the funds. They said the sale never existed." "It existed only on paper," I replied quietly. "I thought I could fix everything," she whispered. "The debts, the image, the pressure, it all made sense at the time. But now?" A breath shuddered through the line. "Now I'm standing in an empty house I don't even own." Rain struck harder against the panes, as if echoing her confession. "Elena," I said, steadying my voice, "truth doesn't destroy, it reveals. This is what happens when we build on pride instead of principle." "I don't have anywhere to go," she murmured. "The staff left. The lights are out. I can't—" Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry." For a long moment, I said nothing. Through the silence, Peter's words rose like a tide in my heart. "Forgive her gently." "Come home, Elena," I whispered. "Not to the house, but to the truth. That's where you'll find me." The line went quiet, except for the faint sound of her crying. Will you even open the door?" "When you knock with honesty," I said. "Not excuses, not vanity, just truth." "I will," she breathed. After we hung up, I set the phone down and moved to the hearth. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing like distant stars. I stirred them gently, watching new flames rise from the ashes. Outside, the rain softened to a mist, whispering against the eaves. I poured a cup of tea and carried it to the table, the steam curling upward like a prayer. Somewhere beyond the valley, my daughter was learning the hardest lesson, that everything built on falsehood eventually returns to dust, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what matters. I raised the cup, eyes closing, and murmured, "May the storm wash her clean, not drown her." The candle's flame wavered, then steadied again. Justice had done its work. Now it was mercy's turn to begin. The rain had quieted by the time night returned, leaving the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet soil. I sat near the window, the candle burning low, my journal open but untouched. Words felt too small for the ache that filled the cottage. Somewhere out there, Elena was facing a silence she could no longer escape, the kind that doesn't accuse, only reveals. A knock came just after midnight. 3 hesitant taps, then stillness. I rose, heart steady but cautious, and opened the door. She stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, her hair clinging to her face. The shimmer of silk and gold was gone. In its place, a worn sweater, sleeves stretched from nervous hands. Her eyes, once bright with certainty, now brimmed with something rawer, remorse. "Mother," she whispered, "I didn't know where else to go." I stepped aside, and she crossed the threshold slowly, as though entering a church. Water dripped from her coat onto the wooden floor. She clasped her hands together, trembling. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought I could outgrow where I came from. That money could cover the cracks. But every door I opened this week led to another wall. The friends who praised me vanished. The bank called. The papers printed lies I wrote myself. And when I looked for help..." Her voice faltered. There was no one left. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Setting it on the table, she pushed it toward me. "I kept this all these years, thinking it was proof of what I deserved. But it never belonged to me." I opened it slowly. Inside lay my wedding ring, the one I'd thought lost during the move. Gold worn smooth from decades of hands joined through storm and harvest. "It belongs where love never left," she said, tears cutting paths down her cheeks. "I can't undo what I've done, but I can start by giving back what isn't mine." I traced the ring with my thumb, feeling the warmth still lingering from her palm. The cottage was silent except for the soft hum of the lantern. I looked up, meeting her gaze. "Do you know what this means, Elena?" She nodded. "It means I can't buy forgiveness. I have to live it." I motioned toward the chair across from me. "Sit." She obeyed, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered. The sight of her like this, no defenses, no sparkle, only sincerity, brought both pain and peace. "When your father and I built the vineyard," I said quietly, "we built it with faith, not fortune. Every vine we planted was a promise, to honor work, to keep truth in the soil. You forgot those promises." "I know," she whispered, "and I want to remember. Teach me how." I studied her face, the lines of exhaustion cutting through youth. "Learning begins with truth, no more hiding behind debt or pride. If you truly want redemption, you must bring nothing but truth into every step from here." She nodded again, tears gathering but unspilled. "Then that's what I'll do. No lies, no shortcuts, just work." Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the hills, a distant echo of all that had passed. I rose and placed the ring back on my finger, its weight familiar and grounding. "You can stay the night," I said softly. "But remember, this house shelters truth, not excuses." Elena looked around the room, her gaze resting on Peter's photograph above the hearth. "He'd hate what I became." "He'd love that you came home," I replied. The clock ticked quietly between us. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "I'll make it right." I poured her a cup of tea, steam curling between us like fragile hope. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep in. We sat together in silence, mother and daughter, surrounded by the hum of rain-soaked earth and the faint scent of rosemary. No apology could erase the wound, but the truth, spoken simply, humbly, was the first thread of healing. As I watched her sip the tea, I thought of Peter's words. Forgive her gently. Mercy, I realized, wasn't softness. It was strength made still. When the candle finally burned low, I whispered, "Welcome back, Elena. Bring nothing but truth, and you'll never be turned away again." Morning broke pale and clean over the valley, mist lifting from the hills like a sigh. The cottage smelled of fresh bread and rosemary, small comforts after a night of uneasy rest. Elena sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes tracing the patterns in the wood grain. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in spirit. The rain had washed away more than vanity. It had taken the illusions too. I placed a mug of coffee before her, Drink, I said. It's a long day ahead. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do whatever you ask, Mother. I just want to make this right. I took a seat across from her. Between us lay a thin folder, edges squared, papers clipped in perfect alignment. I rested my hand upon it. Redemption isn't built on words, Elena. It's built on work. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching. Tell me what to do. You'll start by earning back the ground you sold, I said. That vineyard doesn't just need an owner, it needs a steward. Mason Rivera will oversee operations for the next 10 years. You'll work under him, not above him. Mason? She asked softly. He used to take orders from me. And now you'll learn to take them from him, I replied. Humility is the first harvest after pride. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. I understand. I slid a document across the table. This is a formal agreement. I'll lend you $500,000, 5% interest, 10-year term. You'll repay every cent. The vineyard must recover, and so must you. Charity builds dependence. Accountability builds strength. She traced the lines of the paper with her fingertips. And if I fail? Then you'll still have tried honestly, I said. But I believe you won't. You've already lost more than money could measure. Tears shimmered in her eyes, unfallen. I don't deserve this. No one deserves mercy, I answered. That's why it's mercy. I reached into the drawer and withdrew a single envelope, setting it beside the contract. There's one more condition. You'll write a letter, a public one, not to flatter me, but to free yourself. You'll tell the truth about the sale, the forgery, the lessons you've learned. People believed lies. Let them see the cost. She stared at the blank page as though it were a mirror. Everyone will know. They already do, I said. This letter isn't for them. It's for you. Words, when honest, can heal the very wounds they expose. She took a deep breath, then whispered, I'll do it. I handed her a pen. She held it loosely, then tighter, drawing the paper closer. The first lines came slowly, but soon her hand found rhythm. I watched from across the table as each stroke carved confession into form. When she finished, she set the pen down, her shoulders trembling with quiet release. It's done. I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope. We'll publish it next week. Truth ripens best when shared. Outside, sunlight spilled through the window, catching the dust in soft halos. I opened the door, letting in a breeze scented with lavender. Come, I said. You'll need to speak with Mason. We drove to the vineyard together. The earth was still damp, rows of vines stretching into the distance like green veins across the land. Mason stood near the barn, clipboard in hand, his work clothes smudged with soil. He turned as we approached, surprise flickering across his face. Mrs. Callahan, he greeted warmly. Then, glancing at Elena, his voice softened. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Elena lowered her gaze. I'm here to work, Mason, if you'll have me. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. There's plenty to do. Vines don't care who plants them, as long as the hands are steady. Her eyes glistened. They will be. I watched them shake hands, soil and silk meeting at last. The gesture felt like the first turn of a wheel, long rusted. As we walked the rows together, the sun rose higher, brushing gold over leaf and branch. Elena reached down, touching the soil with her bare fingers. It's cold, she murmured. It's alive, I said. So are you. She closed her hand around a handful of earth, holding it as though it might steady her. Mercy had come, but not as a gift. It had come as labor, patience, and truth. The same way every harvest does. I turned toward the cottage on the hill, the path glimmering in the light, and whispered, Mercy with terms. That's how love teaches. Spring deepened, and the vineyard breathed again. Rows once choked by neglect now shimmered with new leaves, their green sharper against the soil. Elena rose with the dawn each day, her hands blistered, her back sore, her pride thinned to something humbler, steadier. Mason watched her work from a distance, offering guidance when needed, silence when she simply had to learn. I came down most mornings with a thermos of coffee, setting it by the gate before walking the rows. The air smelled of promise and earth after rain. The vineyard no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a classroom. One afternoon, Mason waved her toward the cellar. "We need to sort through the old barrels," he said. "Some may still be good stock. Dust off the ledgers, too. Your father kept notes worth keeping." Elena nodded, pushing back her sleeves. She descended the stone steps slowly, the air cooling with each turn. The cellar door creaked open, releasing the scent of oak and age. She flicked on the light, its dim glow catching dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts. Crates were stacked along the walls, labeled in her father's handwriting. She ran her fingertips over the words: Vintage 1989, North Row, Reserve Lot. Each box whispered a story. Harvests under lantern light, music echoing from the old radio, Peter's voice humming low. Near the far corner, an old ledger had fallen behind a shelf. She bent to pick it up, her hand brushing against a small tin envelope wedged beneath a beam. The paper was brittle, edges curled, but her father's name was clear in blue ink. Her breath caught. She opened it gently, revealing a folded sheet inside. The handwriting, though faded, was familiar. "To my daughter, should you ever lose your way. Remember, a vineyard doesn't punish, it teaches. Soil holds memory longer than pride can bear. If you're reading this, you've found the courage to face the truth. Forgive yourself, but more importantly, earn the forgiveness you seek. Work with your hands, not your image. Let kindness be the root that steadies you, and when you are ready, forgive her gently." The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She sank onto a barrel, letter trembling in her grip. The cellar around her grew quiet, save for the soft drip of water somewhere in the stone. She pressed the note to her heart, sobbing, not with shame this time, but with understanding. Upstairs, Mason paused at the door, hearing the sound. He didn't enter, only waited until her tears softened into breath. When she finally emerged, eyes red but clear, she carried the letter like a vow. "Found something?" he asked. She nodded. "A reminder, one I needed." He studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Then let's make it mean something." That evening, Elena came to the cottage. I was trimming rosemary by the window when I saw her walking up the path, dirt on her boots, sunlight glinting through her hair. She held the letter as though it were fragile light. "I found this in the cellar," she said, voice steady now. "Father left it for me. He knew I'd fall before I'd stand." I read the words in silence, the ink faint but alive. When I reached the final line, "Forgive her gently," my throat tightened. "He always believed forgiveness was a seed, not a sentence," I murmured. She nodded. "He also said to let kindness be the root that steadies me. I want to honor that. I've been thinking about the workers' children, the ones who dream beyond the vines." Her eyes met mine, filled with something new. Not guilt, not grief, but resolve. "I want to start a scholarship for their education. Call it the Peter Callahan Fund. He built this land to give, not to take." I felt warmth spread through my chest. "Then build it, Elena. Let it stand longer than regret." "I will," she said, voice sure. "It's time I plant something that grows without taking." We stood in the doorway as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the vineyard. The vines swayed gently, alive and forgiving. Elena looked out over the land, her father's letter folded in her pocket, her hands calloused but strong. "Thank you for not closing the door," she whispered. "Doors meant to teach don't stay locked," I replied. The breeze carried the scent of fresh earth, rosemary, and hope. Above us, the sky blushed gold, then softened to rose. For the first time in years, I saw peace in her face. Not bought, not borrowed, but earned. She had found her root. The day of the gathering arrived beneath a wide golden sky. The vineyard hummed with life, workers pruning vines, laughter echoing between the rows, the scent of crushed grapes drifting on the breeze. It felt like the valley itself had exhaled after a long season of holding its breath. For the first time in years, Callahan Crest looked not like an empire, but a family. In the barn, we set out long wooden tables polished clean, the air warm with candlelight and rosemary bread. Mason arranged chairs while Martha carried in trays of fruit, humming an old harvest tune. Even David Ames, ever the stoic banker, stood near the doorway with a polite smile, hands folded. Grace Patel reviewed a few documents beside me, her eyes soft with approval. "This is a good day," she said quietly, "the kind that rewrites endings." I nodded. "It's time." When the guests had gathered, the room stilled to a gentle hush. The vines beyond the open doors swayed in the late afternoon light. I stepped to the front, my daughter beside me. She wore a simple linen dress, her hands steady despite the weight they carried. "Elena," I said, "it's your voice they need to hear." She looked at me, then out at the faces before her. Neighbors, workers, old friends who had once turned away. Taking a deep breath, she unfolded the letter she had written, the paper trembling only slightly. "My name is Elena Callahan," she began, her voice clear and even. "I stand here to speak not of what I owned, but what I forgot. In my search for success, I traded roots for ribbons, truth for ease, and nearly lost everything that mattered. I forged a signature, my mother's, believing I could build a future on falsehood. But ink can't bury truth, and pride can't outgrow consequence." A quiet murmur ran through the crowd, then fell still again. She continued, her voice deepening with honesty. "I was raised by hands that worked the soil, by parents who taught that integrity feeds the harvest more than rain ever could. I forgot their lessons. But through law, mercy, and grace, I've been given the chance to learn them again. Today I return not as owner, but as student, not as heir, but as servant of this land." Her eyes found mine, glistening in the light. "To my mother, thank you for standing firm when I fell, for teaching that justice can be quiet and mercy can have terms. I don't ask to be excused. I ask to be allowed to rebuild." She lowered the letter, and for a moment the only sound was the breeze slipping through the open doors. Then Martha stepped forward, tears shining. She began to clap. Others followed, soft at first, then full, warm, real. Elena bowed her head, tears falling freely now. I stepped beside her and took her hand, guiding her toward the center table where a small folder lay waiting. "Elena," I said, "you have faced truth, worked the soil, and carried humility without complaint. Redemption is not forgetting the past, but growing from it. This vineyard was built on partnership between husband and wife, parent and child, earth and heart. Today I restore to you what cannot be bought: trust." I opened the folder, revealing a single document. 20% ownership, I announced, not as inheritance, but as earned equity. Build it with heart, and it will never leave you. Her breath caught. "Mother, I touched her cheek. "Earn it. every day, and never again let pride speak louder than gratitude. She nodded, unable to speak, and drew me into an embrace that smelled of soil and sun and tears. Around us, applause rose once more, not for triumph, but for renewal. Grace stepped forward with a quiet smile. "Peter would have approved," she said. "I think he already has," I replied. Hank approached, leaning on his cane, eyes bright. "Old Peter always said the land forgives if you do." "And so it has," I answered. We broke bread together then, laughter mingling with the creak of wood and the rustle of vines outside. The room glowed in amber light, each face touched by warmth. Elena moved among them, listening more than speaking, her presence no longer demanding attention, but offering it. Later, as the guests drifted out beneath a sky blushing toward twilight, she came to stand beside me at the doorway. The vineyard stretched before us, endless rows breathing in the dusk. "Do you think they'll ever forget what I did?" she asked softly. "No," I said, "and they shouldn't, but they'll remember what you did next." She smiled faintly. "That's enough." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. Mercy with truth lasts longer than shame ever could. The wind rustled through the vines, carrying the scent of promise. For the first time, I felt the circle close, not with bitterness, but with bloom. 1 year later, the vineyard stood whole again. The rows stretched strong across the hills, leaves full and heavy with fruit. The earth smelled of rain and oak, and the air carried the soft hum of a harvest nearly ready. The valley had forgiven, as it always does when met with honest hands. I rose early, as I had all my life, lighting the old lantern before dawn. Its glow flickered across the table where Peter's letter rested. Edges faded, ink still true. Outside, the vines shimmered under morning mist, each drop of dew a small reflection of the sky. Elena's footsteps sounded behind me, steady, sure. "Mother," she said softly, "we finished the last row. Mason says the yield will be our best in years." I turned to her. The woman who once chased approval now carried quiet strength, her eyes clear, her shoulders squared from labor, not pride. "The vines respond to truth," I said. "They know when they're loved." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's something else. The first student of the Peter Callahan Fund just graduated. She wrote to thank us. She wants to study viticulture, says she wants to learn how roots survive storms." I felt warmth bloom in my chest. "Then your father's lesson has taken root." We stepped outside together, walking the familiar path toward the cellar. The afternoon before, I had prepared 2 glasses and a bottle wrapped in linen. The same one Peter had hidden years ago, marked Vintage, 1989. We reached the old table beneath the oak, where sunlight spilled in dappled gold. Through the leaves, Elena ran her fingertips across the label, tracing her father's handwriting. "You saved it all this time?" "He did," I said. "Said it should only be opened when forgiveness was full." She looked at me, eyes shining. "Is it time?" "It is." I eased the cork free, the sound soft and final. The scent rose, rich and mellow. Berries, oak, a whisper of years gone by. I poured 2 glasses, handing one to her. The light caught the wine, turning it to garnet fire. She raised her glass, voice trembling. "To roots." I lifted mine to meet hers. "To grace." We drank in silence, the taste deep and layered, as if the years themselves had aged into understanding. Birds called from the vineyard, and a soft breeze carried the scent of lavender from the hillside. Elena set her glass down, her eyes misted. "I used to think success meant applause," she said quietly. "Now I know it's peace." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Peace grows when we stop running from truth. She nodded, gazing out at the fields. Workers moved steadily among the rows, laughter drifting faintly through the air. For once, the land felt neither burden nor battlefield. It felt alive, anchored by forgiveness. I thought of Peter, of his careful plans, his faith in paper and soil, his final words, "Forgive her gently." He had known that love, like wine, deepens only when given time. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Elena turned to me. "Do you ever miss him?" "Every day," I said. "But he's here. In the vines, in the work, in us. He built more than a vineyard. He built a way back." She smiled through her tears. "Then let's keep walking it." We rose, leaving the glasses half full, glinting in the light like small promises. The wind stirred the vines, and I could almost hear Peter's laugh carried through the leaves. As we reached the gate, I paused, looking back at the hills glowing in the evening sun. "Justice was quiet," I whispered. "Mercy took time. And love never left." The lantern flickered in my hand, warm and steady. The road ahead lay open, the soil beneath firm and forgiving. Together, we walked toward the fading light, mother and daughter, hands brushed with earth, hearts finally at rest.